Today I'll be going over part 3 of Larry Geller's book, Unchained Melody. Today's video is going to be a little bit different because I'm not going to be on camera the whole time. I've had a lot going on over here, been really busy, so this just helps me get the video out so that you guys can watch. So thanks for understanding. Larry says, one day Tom Parker summoned Elvis to his office at MGM Studios. Parker had a sign hung over his door that read, quote, Elvis Exploitations, end quote. Parker didn't tell Elvis why he wanted to meet, and on top of that, it was unusual because the two rarely had meetings. Elvis had Larry ride with him to the meeting where Larry waited outside. After leaving Parker's office, Elvis stormed into the car and slammed the door. He was clearly furious. Elvis said, "How dare that fat-ass son of a bitch? He doesn't know the first thing about my life. He doesn't know anything about me. He said I'm on a kick, a religious kick. I'm not in any damn kick. I told him it's my goddamn life and my life is not a kick. And he talked about you, Lawrence, and all the books I've been reading." Back at the house, Elvis was still upset but calmer, and he began explaining what happened in his meeting with Parker. Elvis said, "Larry, let me tell you, he's just trying to control me, trying to keep me in line. You're not going to believe what I'm going to tell you, but you'll appreciate it. 'Cause you knew Sam Cooke. You used to do his hair. The colonel told me that everyone thinks that Sam was shot and killed in a motel by a prostitute. He was murdered, all right. The colonel told me he was murdered because he got out of line. Cooke was told he had a big mouth and to stay in line, but he didn't do it. You can only go so far with these people." Larry says they were shocked by the death of Sam Cooke in December of 1964. The official story claimed he lured and attacked a woman in a motel room, but those who knew him found it hard to believe, and they suspected the truth might be different. Elvis, who was a big gospel fan and fellow RCA artist, was aware of the rumors that surrounded the situation. Larry writes, quote, "Since there's not enough evidence for anyone to say with absolute certainty exactly what happened to Sam Cooke, I have to accept the official story as true. It's no secret that the colonel knew how to scare the hell out of Elvis, and from his point of view, the only good Elvis was a frightened Elvis," end quote. Elvis had calmed down, but his anger toward Parker lingered and resurfaced often, like later while he was filming Easy Come, Easy Go at Paramount Studios. The script included an unnecessary yoga scene with Elsa Lanchester that mocked yoga. Yoga was something that Elvis respected, and Parker had pushed for it to be portrayed as ridiculous and that the students and teachers were nuts. After this scene, Elvis wanted to go to his dressing room so he could get his hair done. He said, "Follow me, Lawrence. That son of a bitch. I know exactly what he did. He told those damn writers what to write, and he's making me do this. It's his way of making fun of me and what I'm into." Elvis had held in his anger until they reached the dressing room. Then he erupted and threw a glass bottle of Mountain Valley water across the room in frustration. Elvis said, "You saw it, Lawrence. You saw what they made me do. Damn colonel thinks I don't know what's going on. He's trying to control me. He had the writers put that crap in there making fun of yoga. The scene doesn't even belong in that movie. They just threw it in because he said so. Well, his intimidation won't work on me, fat mother effer." Elvis walked back and forth, and then he punched the wall, and he said, "Son of a bitch." He stopped a moment and saw the reaction on Larry's face. Then he softened, he was shaking his head and raising his hands with a sheepish, almost apologetic look. Elvis said softly, all right, I get it." Elvis sat down and said, "Lawrence, I have a tiger in me. I have to learn how to control that tiger." Then he closed his eyes and took some deep breaths and softly said, be still and know." Larry writes, quote, "Elvis faced pressure from the colonel, who ran his career, made the deals, and repeatedly told him, 'Without me, you are nothing. Without me, you'll be in trouble.' On the other hand, there were the fans whom Elvis wanted to please however he could. By this time, there seemed to be no manager more powerful or effective than Colonel Tom Parker. But it's hard to believe that anyone who managed Elvis Presley would not be so regarded. There's no question that the Colonel and Elvis made a dazzling combination, and that the Colonel helped engineer the Elvis phenomenon. Still, there were hundreds of Colonel Parkers, but only one Elvis," end quote. In August 1965, the Beatles were in LA for their Hollywood Bowl concerts. Parker had already met with their manager, Brian Epstein, and they set up a meeting for Elvis and the group on the night of August 27th. Everyone was excited about it, and everyone wanted to meet the Beatles, but the only American they showed interest in seeing was Elvis. That night, Larry drove up to the Perugia Way House. The meeting was supposed to be a secret, but word got out fast. By the time it happened, Elvis's house was packed with fans lining the street, watching every car and even climbing trees just to catch a glimpse of the Beatles. There were cops and media all over, but Larry got waved through and went inside. Elvis was in the den, and as soon as he saw him, he jumped up and pulled Larry into the bathroom to talk. Larry did his hair, but Elvis was unusually quiet and distracted, and he was fidgeting with nervous energy. Then, all of a sudden, Elvis's mood shifted, and he turned to Larry. Elvis said, "Man, I know exactly what those 4 guys are going through. I've been there and done it." Elvis talked about performing live, saying it's all about feeling the audience's energy and being spontaneous and letting the music guide you instead of overthinking it. He said, "That's what I need to do again. Instead of making these dumbass movies that don't mean a thing, just like some of the music they throw in and make me sing, I'm going to tell you the truth, Larry. I'm embarrassed to walk in and meet those guys tonight. I can't imagine what they must think. They're here to meet Elvis Presley, and they know damn well the kind of movies I've been making." Elvis talked about how he felt he was meant for something more meaningful and was frustrated with the kinds of movies he'd been doing. He said, "They're all just the same damn old flick. All they do is change my character's name and throw in a few new sets. The Colonel keeps promising me that he's working on it with Hal Wallace. I just don't believe him anymore." It was clear to Larry that Elvis was holding in his emotions. Elvis said, "Hal Wallace made Blue Hawaii and some great movies with me. He takes the money from my movies and turns around and makes a great dramatic movie like Beckett with great actors like Richard Burton and Peter O'Toole. What about me? Don't they believe that I'm an actor like those guys? I owe it to my fans. I owe it to myself. I always relied on the Colonel to take care of me." Then Elvis said, "Larry, my mom knew it all from the beginning. She flat out told me, 'Elvis, stay away from that man. He just wants to use you. He doesn't really care about you, Elvis. There's just something not right about that man, and he frightens me. Look, I don't take anything away from the Colonel. He's a genius, and he got my whole career started. I owe him everything, but he's out of touch, and he's letting me down." Elvis and Larry joined the group in the den when fans started screaming outside, which they knew could only mean one thing. Brian Epstein walked in with Parker and the Beatles and a few of their entourage. Elvis stood up and everyone shook hands. Then Elvis sat back down while the Beatles sat on the floor in a half circle in front of him, clearly in awe. The room was silent as everyone stared at Elvis in disbelief, and after a long pause, Elvis started to get up and he said, "Look, you guys, if you're going to sit there on the floor and stare at me, I'm going to bed." Everyone laughed and the Beatles stood up. John Lennon said, "Elvis, I picked up my first guitar because of you. All of us did. There'd be no Beatles without you, no Stones and most of the other groups. Man, you started it all." Elvis humbly thanked him and asked about their record sales and what life on the road was like. Paul McCartney said, "Elvis, these crowds, they really get crazy, man. It's scary how they all run after you. Like, what do you do?" Elvis told him, "Son, if you're really scared, you're in the wrong business." This made everyone laugh, and then Elvis regaled them with some stories from the early days of his career, being mobbed, being chased, nearly crashing cars, and other hazards of the celebrity life. John said, "But you're on your own. At least we have each other." As the night went on, Ringo and George Harrison played pool with some of Elvis's group. Parker and Brian Epstein talked business by the roulette wheel that Parker had set up on the other side of the living room. Jerry Schilling, Joe Esposito, Charlie Hodge, and Larry stayed in the den with Elvis, John, and Paul. Paul noticed Elvis's guitars and asked, "Okay if I play one?" And Elvis said, "Yeah, sure." Paul grabbed a bass and started playing, and when John pointed at a guitar, Elvis smiled and gave him the go-ahead. Elvis joined in with his Martin, and suddenly it was Elvis, John, and Paul all playing together. Larry writes, quote, "I thought to myself, in the vastness of time and space, there was nowhere better to be than in this very spot, experiencing a musical miracle in this fleeting moment that will only live on in my memory. Not only was nothing recorded that night, but the Colonel had ordered that no photos or anything else would leave the house." End quote. John started singing Memphis, Tennessee, and Paul joined in, and then Elvis jumped in with Johnny Be Good. Larry says the group smoothly followed Elvis's lead. About an hour in, someone asked where George Harrison was. He was nowhere to be found in the house, so Larry went looking outside. When he stepped into the backyard, the smell in the air made it pretty clear where he was. George was standing behind a tree, and when he saw Larry, he held out his hand and offered Larry a, quote, taste. Larry took a hit, and they talked about mutual interests. During their conversation, Larry mentioned a book Elvis was interested in, Autobiography of a Yogi. George said, "Elvis read that book? I never thought Elvis would be into that." Larry describes George as very kind and soft-spoken and intelligent, and he liked him immensely. Near the end of the night, Elvis took the Beatles outside to show them his new car, a black Rolls-Royce Phantom 5, and the crowd's screams erupted as soon as they stepped out. They were shouting, "Elvis, Elvis," and "Beatles, Beatles," and "Elvis, we love you," and also "Beatles, we love you." Larry says the fans' cheers became rhythmic like a chant, then turned into a loud back-and-forth competition. After showing the Beatles his car, Elvis brought them back inside to show off a new wooden sauna Parker had given him and that had been placed outside Elvis's bedroom door. The sauna had a little window, and when Paul peeked into it, he asked, "Who's that?" One of the guys opened the door, and they saw a teenage girl huddled underneath the wooden bench. When she saw Elvis, she screamed, "Elvis, Elvis," and then jumped on him. They had to pry her off of him and took her away, and to this day, they still don't know how she got past all their security. After the Beatles left around 2 a.m., Larry walked Elvis to his bedroom. Elvis said, "I like them. I really like those guys." And then after a moment, he smiled and said, "Lawrence, remember one thing. There's 4 of them. There's only 1 of me." Larry says after meeting the Beatles and wrapping the film Paradise Hawaiian style, Elvis drove them in the Dodge motorhome back to Memphis overnight with Larry riding beside him. Road trips were usually lively, but this time Elvis was quiet and deep in thought. He asked one of the guys to hand him Roy Orbison's 8-track and played Only the Lonely. Then suddenly he began singing along to it. Larry says he was spellbound listening to Elvis and Roy singing together. When the song was over, Elvis, with great passion, told Larry, "I got it, Larry. I got it. I know what I'm going to do. The time has come for me to record a gospel album. This will be my album with my songs. I'm going to choose every song myself. Don't want the Colonel involved. Don't want RCA to tell me what to sing. It's going to be all me. This album will say it all." Larry writes, quote, "I never talked to Elvis about this, but I've always believed that meeting with the Beatles was his subconscious inspiration for needing to create something significant, something more meaningful than the movies they'd been putting him in. The gospel album he recorded was How Great Thou Art, for which he received his first Grammy Award. Elvis had sold more albums and records than any other single artist who had ever recorded. Yet the king of rock and roll never won a Grammy for rock, pop, country, or any other genre for which he was famous, only for the music of his soul," end quote. Elvis became deeply engaged and energized with the album. He carefully selected songs over months to create an album that was more meaningful to him and was distinct from his typical movie soundtracks. He fully immersed himself like he did in the 1950s, listening closely to classic black gospel singers. He told Larry, "Black musicians have more soul in their little fingers than most whites have in their whole bodies." When Elvis heard a song he loved, it filled him with joy and lifted him into a happier, almost transcendent state. One afternoon at Graceland, Elvis was reading fan mail while getting his hair styled by Larry. Elvis said, "No way, man, no way. This girl has it all wrong. God bless her. She writes, 'Elvis, I love you. I listen to your music every day. You're the greatest. You invented rock and roll.'" Elvis said to Larry, "Let me tell you the truth that most people have no idea about. How the whole thing really happened." Elvis paused, lost in thought. He said, "It all began not too far from where we are right now in the Mississippi Delta, in the heart of the deep old South. Man, back in those days, the poor old colored slaves were forced to work their asses off. I mean, they had to, or they'd be whipped, tortured, or raped, even killed by the sons of bitches in charge. Just like the Hebrew slaves in Egypt back in the Bible days, these slaves really knew what pain and suffering was, more than most people can ever imagine. From the time the sun came up till it went down, they worked in the fields picking cotton or whatever else they had to do. It broke their damn backs and bodies, bending down and working all day long in the hot, blistering sun. But it didn't break their spirit. I mean, they would drive those slaves half to death, whipping them until their bodies were streaked with blood. I know, I've been told some horrible things of what happened back then that you wouldn't believe." Larry was hanging on every word. Elvis's emotions showed through, and after a brief pause, he looked down and then met Larry's eyes. Elvis said, "And do you know how they survived, Larry? How they got through it? They sang. It was their music and their faith. That's how. Slaving their lives away, they did what came natural to them. They sang. They sang their hearts out from deep down in their guts, their souls. All day long, slaving in the fields, they would all sing, crying out to God together, making up the words as they went along. And some of those songs from back then are still with us today." Elvis talked about how he was amazed by their strong faith in God, saying it carried them through, and that was a powerful lesson for everyone. Elvis said, "They brought their music right into their churches, and then white people started copying what they did. As time went by, their music spread outside the churches to become honky-tonk and ragtime in places like New Orleans and Beale Street right here right here in Memphis. They became the birth of the blues in St. Louis, Chicago, and New York. Then it eventually evolved down to our times in what we know as rhythm and blues. Larry noticed Elvis brush his hand across his eyes, but acted like he didn't see it. Elvis said, "Look, the real truth is that I was just lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time, and all I did was to take their music and hand it over to a white audience." Larry writes, quote, "Elvis's appreciation and respect for the black roots of his music grew over the years as he got to know and befriend many of the contemporaries of his day." End quote. In 1965, Elvis made a rare night out to see Jackie Wilson perform, despite usually avoiding clubs and public outings. The club was crowded with Elvis, Priscilla, and Larry's group seated near the stage in roped-off tables alongside the entourage. Jackie delivered an electrifying performance that had the crowd roaring, especially when James Brown arrived with his date and joined Elvis's table to watch the rest of the show. After the show, they went backstage where Jackie warmly greeted everyone, and Elvis told him how much he enjoyed the performance. Elvis said, "Man, Jackie, the woman went crazy when you started sweating like that." Jackie laughed and grabbed a bottle of pills and said, "Here's my secret, man. These are salt pills. I swallow a handful before the show, wash down with a couple of glasses of water. When I start doing my thing, the pills kick in and beads of sweat roll down my face and right through my clothing. The ladies love it." Everyone laughed. Larry writes, quote, "As we got ready to leave, Elvis, James Brown, the king of soul, and the great Jackie Wilson exchanged hugs in an expression of mutual respect and admiration." End quote. Larry says when Elvis passed away, his casket was placed in front of the music room the day before his funeral. James Brown arrived around noon and sat in a chair next to Elvis's casket, and for 5 hours didn't say a word, but every time he looked up, one could see the absolute anguish on his face. Larry and Charlie stayed in that room for most of the day, and at one point, James looked at them and, shaking his head, said, "We were brothers." Larry says when recording How Great Thou Art, Elvis took full control. Parker and RCA stepped back, and Elvis relied on Red West and Charlie Hodge to help sort through songs that were brought to him by Tom Diskin and Freddie Beanstalk of Hill and Range Music. They helped select songs and prepare Elvis for the album, which reflected his vision and passion, and it ultimately led to How Great Thou Art. It was recorded at RCA Records in Nashville in 1966. It was the first time Elvis would work with producer Felton Jarvis, and he was excited. Elvis respected Felton, who would become an important part of his music going forward. While exploring gospel music, Elvis became especially fascinated with Jimmy Jones, whose deep bass voice made a strong impression on him. Jones was known for his work with groups like the Southern Sons Quartet, the Harmonizing Four, and the Mighty Clouds of Joy, and Elvis enjoyed hearing stories about him. Elvis said, "Man, that man can sing. They say that he could get the devil himself to change his ways if he heard him." He became obsessed with Jones's recordings and really wanted him at the session, but no one could track Jones down. At the Albert Pike Motel in Nashville, just before heading to the first RCA session in May 1966, Elvis asked Larry to stay behind with him while the others went to load the cars. Elvis said, "Larry, millions of people around the world are going to hear this album. This album is not rock and roll, man. This is God's music, and it's going to reach people in ways we can't even imagine. And you know as well as I do that God works in mysterious ways. If only one person is touched, then I will have done my job. So I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to close our eyes, still ourselves, and meditate. I can't be a channel if my ego is in the way. I have to empty myself so that the message can be heard loud and clear. And I'm not going to use this voice that I've been given or even get out of this chair until I'm guided by that still, small voice." Larry and Elvis sat together in the dark, quiet room, meditating in silence with only brief prayers at the beginning and end. About 15 minutes passed when Elvis softly said, All right, I'm ready. Let's hit it." When Elvis walked into RCA Studio B, the energy felt electric and different from any other session. He was introduced to Felton Jarvis and engineer Jim Malloy. Freddie Beanstalk, Tom Diskin, and Harry Jenkins were full of anticipation, and the group of musicians gathered that night was unusually impressive. Elvis's boyhood idol, Jake Hess, and his gospel group, the Imperials, were there, as well as gospel soprano Millie Kirkham and two other female backup singers of the Jordanaires. The original members of Elvis's band were there too, Scotty Moore on guitar and DJ Fontana on drums. Here's a list of the other musicians followed by their respective instruments. Bob Moore on bass, Charlie McCoy on harmonica and bass, Buddy Harmon drums, Floyd Kramer on piano, Boots Randolph on saxophone, Chip Young on guitar, Henry Strelecki on bass, Henry Slaughter on piano and organ, David Briggs on piano and organ, Pete Drake on the steel guitar, Rufus Long, saxophone, and Ray Stevens on the trumpet. Larry writes, Quote, "From the very outset, it was unmistakable to everyone that Elvis's voice was in brilliant form. The sheer vitality and range of his vocal colors, coupled with a heightened sense of phrasing and musicianship, imbued the music with the warmth, power, and depth that these gospel songs deserved. He didn't just sing about, he lived it in every lyric, every whisper, every pause," end quote. Peter Guralnick talked about this session. He said, quote, "To Jerry Schilling, it was as if Elvis had been taken over by another spirit as he built to a vocal crescendo that left him visibly shaken. He didn't do a lot of takes, but something almost frightening happened on that song," referring to How Great Thou Art. "It was like he was just drained. He turned white and almost fainted when he finished. I wish I could verbalize it better, and I don't know if I'm talking about 3 minutes or 3 seconds, but it was as if something happened outside the normal experience. And I don't really think like that ordinarily, and it's not even my favorite song. But there was no question that for Elvis something really happened," end quote. About 10 years later on tour, they arrived at a Hilton in Hollywood, Florida, where crowds of fans were waiting, and Larry noticed a familiar superfan covered in Elvis pins and badges. Even though Elvis's tour plans were kept secret, dedicated fans somehow always found out. They travel long distances just for a glimpse thanks to their surprisingly effective network. Charlie said, "They know where we're going before we do." Larry says the fans knew everyone on a first-name basis. One girl said, "Hi, Larry, how's Elvis?" Larry said, "He's doing great." Then Larry went to his room to unpack. Afterward, he went back downstairs to eat, and when he saw her in the crowd, something made him ask her if she wanted to join him for coffee. Her name was Darlene, and when he asked her, "Tell me something, Darlene, why all the Elvis buttons and patches? Why do you follow Elvis?" She smiled and told him, "That's simple, he saved my life." Larry writes, quote, "Darlene was about 25 with soulful eyes and an angelic face. Her body was a whole different matter, reflecting the full brunt of her physical problems. Her upper torso was petite, while her body was disproportionately large from the waist down. She walked with a noticeable limp, which she explained was the result of a childhood spinal injury. She had fallen down a flight of stairs during an epileptic seizure. Sipping her cup of coffee, Darlene talked about Elvis and herself," end quote. Darlene said, "Larry, I couldn't take the pain any longer. I just couldn't. Nothing helped. I just wanted to end it. I mean, look at me. Who would ever want to marry me? How could I ever even have a boyfriend? I guess I just gave up hope of having any kind of life at all. God, the pain was so unbearable. The pills weren't really working anymore, and I just wanted out. I had vials of pills that my doctor gave me, and I even wrote a note to my family and put it on my nightstand. I had a glass of water and was ready to gulp down a handful of pills. As I reached to turn off my radio, I suddenly heard Elvis singing How Great Thou Art. Larry, it's hard to explain, but I burst out crying and fell to my knees." Her eyes started to well up and she continued, "It was the way he sang it. All the love of God seemed to come through him. I felt I could actually reach out and touch God. It felt like he was close to me in the room. Right there and then I vowed to dedicate my life to Elvis, to help and protect him if I could. There was no doubt in my mind that God had chosen that moment to send him to help me. I had to live for him and for God." Darlene's story deeply affected Larry. 10 years later, Elvis's words still rang in Larry's mind. "And you know as I do, Lawrence, that God works in mysterious ways." Larry told Darlene that Elvis believed the album would one day help bring someone closer to God in a meaningful way. Then he told her he had to go back upstairs because Elvis was waiting for him, but that he was going to tell Elvis about Darlene's story. She said, "Really? You're actually going to tell Elvis about me?" Upstairs, Elvis was hanging out with Ginger and some of the guys in the suite. Larry asked Elvis to talk privately, and then he shared Darlene's story along with what had happened years earlier in Nashville. Elvis, wearing his blue bathrobe with the hood up, was touched, and he walked over to the window and stood by it, reflecting on what he'd just heard. After a long silence, Elvis said, "God works in mysterious ways, Lawrence, that's for sure." And then he stared out the window, and he looked like he was trying to solve something profound. He turned to look at Larry and lovingly said, "All I ever wanted was to help people, love them, lift them up, spread some joy. That girl downstairs, man, she's the living proof, Lawrence. You know, I've told you many times that my moment of glory is being on that stage and singing and feeling all the love the audience sends to me. It's a complete circle of love we send each other. If you could experience that for one moment, you would know what I was talking about. It's beyond any mortal high, I'll tell you that." Larry told him, "Darlene." Elvis said, "Right, Darlene. Well, if that happened to Darlene, what about others? This means more to me than experiencing my moment of glory. I mean, a person's life was saved. That's a fulfillment that's greater than anything." That's it for part 3. Stay tuned for part 4, which is titled Deciphering the Language of God. See you then.